podcasts are too long because I'm just like actually that's why I stopped listening to Critical Role because they're fucking 4 hours long.
I can't get into them, and it's not because like I'm like, oh, Critical Role sucks. It's literally 4 hours, 8 players. There's so much going on.
So much.
You have to play. You have to constantly pay attention. Mm-hmm. It's like, bro, I don't have that time. I understand there are players and DMs and people who love spending the time to do that, and like, but when you're playing or DMing 2 sessions a week,
that shit's crazy.
Yeah, because like I DM the.
What I was about to say. I can't. Yeah, there's no. I think I tried to listen to season 3 because I was like, oh, it just started. It was like when it first started. I was like, oh, let me listen to it, and that shit just was like way too fucking. I was like, yeah, I can't.
And it's a completely different experience. Where I think the reason why I think I like the other one a little bit more is because Dimension 20's style is 1 hour sessions. It's clearly more scripted, but scripted to a point. Brennan's style of DMing is very similar to mine.
It's way more enjoyable to watch too. Yeah.
It's just his style he is what like every improv fucking like nerdy kid who's like, oh hey, by the way, I just love doing like improv and I love doing like choir or like dance or whatever, and like this is just like my escape. He's that nerdy like theater major kid who's just like, I'll behave, good sir.
Right.
And then he's like, let me just go ahead and just start making stories. But his mom's like a storyteller too.
Yeah, his mom wrote that one, the universe to the one he was. Yeah.
So his mom's a fantasy writer. Mm-hmm. So like that's like a whole element too, where he like grew up in that space of like D&D was like his whole lifeblood, and he was given the freedom. Where like the problem with our society is like, especially up until like the early ages, and this will all, I think we're gonna throw this in.
Yeah, 100%.
I think the biggest issue I ran into with like the early ages of being a player, and we'll actually, on that note, we will start this episode, guys. Hey, so hopefully you've been listening to us for the past 2 minutes, just talk BS behind the scenes.
All right.
But for those who don't know, I'm Justin.
I'm Shaizon.
And we are the hosts of the Resource Gatherer podcast, a podcast dedicated to all of our fellow nerds and D&D and magic lovers as we continue to talk about this deep dive topic of Dungeons and Dragons. So this is going to be a little continuation off of last week, where last week we really talked about it from the DM perspective. This week we're going to be talking about it from the player perspective. So, Shaizon.
Yes.
My first question for you, my good sir, is what was your first experience with Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh shit! Wow, take me back. No, yes. So
backing up.
Yeah, my first experience as a player was actually it was a guy at my job. He asked me to play because I think I was interested, and I was like, oh, it sounds cool. Sure, I'll try it out. Went to his house. It was an okay experience. I played pretty much a self-insert. I wanted to play Guts from Berserk, but I named him Shay, and then just went off from there. He was
Was he a black guy at least?
Yes, he was a black guy with like he had
so he was black
dread.
Guts.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? That does bring me to something actually, which is I'm actually glad you said that. Is I usually only play black characters in like Dungeons and Dragons, and I don't know what it is about that, but I feel like it's just because
it's a part of your identity.
Yeah.
There's not enough of the multicultural aspect in D&D and in the environment, especially like, I mean, granted, in today's society, I think there's a lot more acceptance and a lot more diversity within our community. I mean, the community's gotten so much larger than it has back when I first started. But that kind of leads me back to, so you're playing this Guts character, you're playing this self-insert. Why did you draw into D&D? Like, what was the moment where you're like, this is it for me. This is the thing I want to like commit my entire personality to.
I think it was when I was just like, it really gave me. This is gonna sound bad, but I was a murder hobo for my first campaign, and I think that's what really drew me into D&D. I was like, this is so much fun. I can just like, there was like, I was like, it's so much fun just when he's like, how do you want to do this? And I'm like, I fucking take my greatsword and split him in half, and I was like, yeah. I was just like, that was what was fun to me. So it's weird, but I'm not too much of a murder hobo now, I like to think, but it was the murder hoboing that really made me enjoy D&D, weirdly enough.
Yeah, so my first experience, and I talked about this on the Talk Nerdy to Me podcast for any of our like diehard listeners, you guys are the true MVPs. New listeners, we love you too, but like those guys have been with me through the bullshit. Yeah. But I talked about it with Ken, who's going to be one of the cast members for Dice Age Season 2. I was your typical like hippie style, like dressed. I had like long hair. I had a longboard. I was like super into like skinny jeans and like the whole fad. I was that dude in 2009 who was like, yeah, you know what? Panic at the Disco is my anthem.
Right, Hilly's on.
Yeah, but actually it was like EDM music. But anyways, so during that time frame, I moved back to the United States from Japan, and so like literally like I met a group of people in Arizona where I was living at the time, and they were like, hey man, you want to come play D&D with us? And I was like. So they were like already nerdy dudes. Like I like to write. My buddy liked to draw. We'd already making comic books and stuff. And I was like, you know, man, like I really think I want to get laid. So I don't know if I want to play D&D.
Right.
Because again, peak 2009, like only in my mind.
That was the negative stigma. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. This is early 2000s, guys.
Yeah. So like in that time frame, D&D did not have the level of play that it has now. But also this was 3.5, not 5th edition. I think 5th edition was like a whole other element. So 3.5, I got to play like one campaign. I was playing like. Because I was like a tall dude, my tendency was I really like to play small characters for whatever reason. So I was playing a halfling ranger, and I was like, yeah, my whole goal is I just want to shoot people with my bow and ride on the back of my little wolf pet that I had and like use it as a mount to like fight combat.
What was the name of this character?
It was like something Littlefoot. It was like like clearly like most manly name. The whole point for me was like from a character standpoint, it was like, oh, this is like fun and interesting because day one, you're making your character and you're like, why am I here? I think I'm in the wrong room. I don't know if I want to do this. But once you get past like the character making, especially if you're a new player and you don't really know anything, you get past the math, numbers, and backgrounds, and you just start playing the game. That opens up the door to you to be like, oh, this is a fun experience.
100%.
And I think for me, I drew more into the storytelling aspect, just being as a writer and everything too. Like it was like, okay, I can take my novels and stories that I write, and I'm sitting in isolation, and I'm sitting here questioning my life decisions, and I can be like, hey friends, do you guys want to go out and like play in my little fantasy worlds? And people are like, oh yeah. And I'm like, hey, you want to play Pokemon, but like as adults, and it's going to be violent. It's basically like a Dark Souls background. And people are like, that sounds okay. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, now it's called Monster Manual. That's a shout out to Monster Manual for anybody who doesn't know.
Check it out.
But that was like, again, it's like the fun side of like being a player. So
that was the main thing that got you into it though, is the more the story side?
Yeah. So like being a player is great. I think that there's a lot of really good draw to being a player, and every chance I can be a player, I love being a player.
Yeah.
But I will say that the biggest element of being a player is I really want a good group of players with me.
Yes.
And I need a good DM to provide the story for me.
And you just hit the nail on the freaking head, man. Because that is my biggest gripe of being a player. And that was the main thing I was going to get to. As my first character, I feel like I didn't get to do certain things that I wanted to do. And I don't know if that was just because of communication with the DM or just because I feel like as a player, you can't necessarily guide the story in the way you want.
But see, that's actually the opposite. So like, fun fact, I think it's after I became a DM, I realized how much more power the player has than the DM.
Yes.
Because there's instances like where I was playing in this campaign and the DM really just like didn't want me to be able to do certain things because I was an experienced player and I like wanted to mess with the DM. So I just decided to do things to intentionally mess with the DM, but I just rolled really well. The DM just had to go with it because the rolls were so high.
Yeah.
So like, for example, like we were supposed to break into this goblin complex when I was playing here with a couple of my buddies, and I was like, I'm a guard. And they were like, who are you? And I was like, I'm one of the guards to relieve you. And I rolled a natural 20. And so the guard was like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. And he has to leave because it just makes sense from like a thematic standpoint. And then they bring in new guards to like stop me because I was the DM, be like, all right, well, I'm gonna get you now. And then I pretended that a dragon was attacking us. And the other players heard what I was saying and faked a dragon attack. And then I pretended that I was bleeding and dying and like crawling on the ground. And I like started burning their camp down because it was made of wood. And so like, because of those type of moments, I think the players have way more power than what a DM wants to give them. Because you're ultimately there if a DM story is a car, the DM is the one who has the gas pedal and the brake, but the players are the wheel.
Yeah.
And so regardless of what you say or do, you can say, hey, I'm going to go on this road. The players can drive off that road, park the car, open up a tavern and say, you know what? I think this is our new home.
Yeah.
And they could just build themselves a home in the middle of nowhere. And that could be what they do. And they're just like, we want to play Animal Crossing for the rest of the time we play D&D. And that is what you have to accept for the rest of your life.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think that brings us more to just having a discussion too. As the players having a discussion with the DM, communication is key when you are literally playing D&D. Like, because it's literally you guys just trying to each all have a great time and figuring out what you want to do. So that session 0, I think, is going to be the main thing to just discuss what everybody wants out of the game.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think session zeros are important for 2 elements. And this goes on to the player and the DM side. So as a player, session 0 is to give you general facts and information about the world to help guide your character along.
Yeah.
For example, if I'm like, hey, I really want to play like this really, really edgy, spooky, scary skeleton monster guy who's like gonna basically murder hobo, but you're like, your whole story is like, well, guess what, guys? We're playing in like a really, really, really like a bunny pop type of like My Little Pony campaign.
Yeah.
I don't know if your character is going to work here,
Right.
but we can make it work. But like, I think that's like one of those elements for like as a player, like what you should expect from a session 0 is information about the gameplay, establishing the rules of what you can and can't do. So for example, Shaizon talked in the last episode about he's going to say no to certain things. Understand that about your DM, but also as a DM, understand to give that to your players.
Yes.
If you're like dead set on like, listen, I don't want any murder hobo stuff in my campaign. I don't want to play that route. I want you guys to focus on the story because this is what I'm going to spend time and months of my life dedicating is this primary story. You can diverge a little bit, but ultimately this is a streamlined style campaign. And you're like, well, I want a sandbox. Yeah. It might not be the right DM for you.
100%. I feel like, yeah, as a player, you can literally just be like, no, that isn't right for me. Move on. If you feel like any type of play style doesn't work for you or the DM's doing anything just unusual, it's always best to just walk away.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, sometimes it's not even the DM, it's the other players.
Yeah,
I've run into more situations where I think other players were problematic that I didn't want to have to deal with.
Yeah.
Versus like spending the week every week feeling exhausted. And I think that's like the biggest problem for a lot of people as a DM or as a player is you don't pick the right group. Just because your friend group is like, hey, we're all these people who like to play murder hobo style campaigns, and you're like, well, I'll take the mantle of DMing because it is a mantle. It's a job.
It really is. Yeah,
it's a job.
To be honest,
you have to show up. You have to be prepared. You're the one who can't just show up and be like, all right, guys, I got my dice and I got my notes, and I'm gonna sit here and pretend like I remember everything from last week, and I'm gonna rely on everyone else to do my job.
Oh yeah,
I'm gonna roll dice and show up and be like, all right, guys, we're good to go.
Right.
Your job is you are the story. So like, if the story doesn't show up, then the players can't play.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, as a player, I think that there are things that you should do before you, in that session 0 even, is understand what your DM needs from you as a player in order for you all to have success. So for example, as Shaizon stated, I'm an improv DM. So the more notes my players take for me, the easier my life is. Like I play a campaign on Mondays. All 4 of those people are taking notes constantly, writing every increment down. And the thing is that it's a style campaign where it's very investigative and like murder mystery style campaign. So it's like you need those details, or without them, you won't solve the mystery.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And so that's why and that's why before this game started, I was like, hey guys, you're all brand new players. This is the expectation. Take notes, show up, and have fun. So what is something you think that people, even experienced DMs or players, make that it's something that they don't do as a player that they should?
Circles back around to what you literally just said, is take those notes. Like, come on, y'all. Don't ever, I hate when my players are like, oh, I have a really cool idea for something. And it was like, what was the thing that you said? And it's like, no, if you had a really cool idea for it and you really cared about that thing, take notes and just, that's a huge pet peeve of mine. Just as a DM though, it's just like when the players don't remember certain things that like are important to them.
Yeah. I absolutely, and I mean, there is a certain level of, respect to that where it's like, I am a player, and I have to play my character.
Yeah.
Would my character necessarily remember that information if my intelligence score is like a 5? Probably not. But on the flip side, you don't always have, so there is a distinction between you and your character. And so I think for me, the biggest thing that I think people forget is they focus so much on the information that their character would know. So we run into two problems, right? So the biggest thing I think people run into is metagaming.
Yes.
And metagaming falls into two forms. Yeah. It's either you hear something from that your character would know, like your character hears something, or you as a player hear something that another player is doing or interacting with that your character wouldn't know. But on the flip side, oftentimes your character can hear these things that you might not have been paying attention to or finding details for. For example, if you're the rogue and you're walking into a room and you're like, yeah, we just walk in here and then a trap goes off, you're like, wait, why didn't I check that?
Yeah.
It's because the DM is noticing that you aren't paying attention in game and he isn't taking those elements of your player your character would be on guard in the situation. Just because you're relaxed about it doesn't mean that your character wouldn't be.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you have to give and take, right? So DMs have to be more lenient towards those elements of like,
guide the players a little bit, help them out. Because like you said, at the end of the day, it's a group project. So it's like if you're like, hey, I think your character will probably pick up on this and do something. And I feel like actually now that brings me back to the question you literally just asked, is like, that's also another thing, is that DMs don't take into account the players at all sometimes. And I feel like that's a big thing.
Yeah, so a big element of storytelling, right? Because you're having this element of like, hey, I have 4 or 5 players who all have intricate backgrounds, and one of them, let's say they're from like the Feywilds, but you focus, and let's say they do with what you do, they do these story arcs for the 4 characters, and then they're like, well, I'm going to do the 5th one in the Feywilds with this 5th character, but they didn't realize that the person escaped the Feywilds because they're like terrified of whatever's there or something. So like, those little intricate details can really start to dive into like elements of like building your character. So I think the biggest thing for new players, not showing up with an idea of who your character is.
Yes.
I think for experienced players, it's note taking, like you said. So for new players, if you're new to Dungeons and Dragons and you're looking for an experience where it's like, hey, how do I build this character? Or I don't think I'm a great writer. You don't have to be a great writer
at all.
As Shaizon said, there is so much medium in the world. Yeah. Whatever your favorite book is, whatever your favorite.
Guts.
Yeah. Literally just play Black Guts, as Shaizon said.
Play Guts.
But whatever that character is, like whoever your favorite character is, implement those details. So like what I often do is I try not to create really intricate, fun characters that are unique as a player most of the time, because I like to save those elements when I'm a DM, especially because I do the podcast. I like to keep those like fresh flavor characters. I'm like, ooh, that's a really spicy NPC. Right? Got to keep that one. Or I like use them in my books. So like I try not to do that, but like what I do is I take elements of my favorite mediums, because it's the one time if I'm not recording, I get to play those things. So like my favorite movie and book is The Princess Bride. So
great movie though. I literally just rewatched that recently, which is hilarious.
We'll dive into. We're gonna dive into movies. So we will dive into classics, and then we'll dive into anime. Yeah. We'll do it all, man. We got the rest of our lives to talk about stuff. But back onto the topic. I've always liked the idea that if you like elements about a character, you can play those elements into the story. It's the same way you can play into a video game. So like if you're like, oh man, I really love Cloud from like Final Fantasy VII. You're like, that's my dude.
Yes.
Well, then your whole personality is that you like don't talk and you just swing a giant sword. But your blood, your guts without all the violence.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm just joking, Final Fantasy fans. Don't come for me. I know he has a whole.
Right. They're like, no, it's so different.
They're like, listen, man.
All the hate comments now.
Yeah, we're gonna get banned by Final Fantasy. But but for real though, if you have a character that you're really intricate in, and you're like, whoa, I don't want to be that person, but I do. Yeah. Just steal it. There's nothing saying that you can't steal it unless you're like claiming something as your own in like an official way. For example, like if you're doing a show. Yeah. So then just don't play official shows if you're going to steal people's stuff.
I mean, you can still...
You can borrow.
Borrow, exactly. Yeah.
Borrowing is a whole thing. So
Never
I think...
steal the borrow.
Yeah, so I don't think... So like, for example, also if it's like meta commentary or like joking into it. So like parody law is like a huge thing that you're allowed to have. It's like part of freedom of speech. She just wants you to like rub.
I know, she's like.
So this is her whole life. For everyone at home, this is Salem the cat. She's the love of my life. She's a part of this podcast because she lives here. Also because she just really likes attention, and she likes to let people hear her jingle. Right. But yeah, I think that as a player, I think one of the biggest things for new players to go into is don't get overwhelmed.
Yes.
I think oftentimes in D&D, you're like, I'm a new player. I don't know where to start. I don't have a group of people who are playing. I watch people online play it. I think the game seems cool.
Yeah.
I really have this idea for a thing that I want to do or a character I really want to play. But based off of what you guys are saying, the character might not get played in this. It can only work in a certain style campaign, or like Legolas wouldn't necessarily be in a cyberpunk world. What I say to that is that's true. But that's not to say that it's true in every instance. So if, for example, Samurai Jack was like one of the greatest shows ever created, right?
Yes, bro, a cool show.
Deep cut. Deep cut.
Yeah.
I'm showing my age. But Samurai Jack was like a super dope show that literally talks about Legolas, i.e. Samurai Jack, inside of a cyberpunk world. So based off of my own logic, yeah, or every isekai ever, but it's fantasy based, not sci-fi.
Yeah.
So but regardless, I think that don't overcomplicate it when you're starting off. What I generally tell people is keep it simple, stupid.
Yes.
That's the idea with anything, right? So if you're a new DM, don't try to overcomplicate your story points. Start small. As a player, start small. So for example, what does your character look like? And if you're like, oh, I don't know what character I want to look like, what class do you want to be? Oftentimes, as a player,
your class will help you literally figure out all that.
Exactly. So like, because there's races that have natural benefits to certain classes. So for example, if you're like, I really want to play a barbarian. Well, there's two classes or two races that generally work really well with barbarians. Humans, you're basic, but you're a human. And you're a dwarf because you're basic, but you're a dwarf.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with being the dwarvish barbarian or even the Goliath barbarian, because that's going to be really popular because of Critical Role.
Yeah, and you're starting off, so it's like you start off small, literally.
Yeah, and I mean,
like anything in life, start off small.
Yeah, and then once you develop like that, then you think about, okay, what's my character's name going to be? It doesn't have to be anything serious. Yes. Most of the time, I name my characters like really, really dumb stuff. I named I had a halfling barbarian who his axe was actually like a musical instrument. I named him Barden.
Yeah.
Barden the Barbarian, and he just shapeshifted into a giant rat.
It was a rat.
And then he like literally like his whole thing was that he could cast like this. It was supposed to be a flute of sewer crawling, like whatever the flute is called.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Something like rats and stuff, right?
But I made it into a guitar string, and then I just summoned rats, and I was just like playing like heavy metal, and I was a heavy metal bard with like doom doom doom, and then I have like rat army just going.
Yeah. And that does bring it back to the thing though. It's just like when you're coming up with a character, just have a cool concept. That's literally it. And be like, I'll just go off of that. Like, for example, Shay, he was literally, like I said, guts. And then you're just like, that's it. I'm done. And that was literally how it was. And that made it 100% easier to just be a player. Because now, and really too, if you have a great DM, they will shape your character into something else instead of just that concept too.
Yeah, I agree. So my next question is, if you're a new player and you're looking for people, where can you go? What resources are there out there?
Oh, just go to your local game store, of course. That actually, I think that, or around here we have we have like a little bar that has pretty much where you can go and meet people and they play D&D there. So that's nice. It's really hard. It is kind of hard to meet people to play D&D, I'll be honest. That's definitely locally around you.
So I think there's two different types of metas, right? So to get an established group that you can play with weekly is generally pretty difficult. And the main reason for that is because the issue that most people run into is that you can't find a DM.
Yeah.
It's actually the reason why 80% of the time I just offered a DM so we can play D&D. And it's actually why I just continued to do it for so long until I got really good at it. But as a player, if you're looking for a group, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can go through the online method. There's like online tabletop adventuring software, your local game stores. Sometimes your local game stores even have events. Like our game store actually has, so like Game Haven, one of the shows that we used to work with, they sponsor D&D events where you can actually come, play as a character with a bunch of randos, and just sort of play through a DM story, and they had DMs actually come out. I used to go out there and actually DM for people, and they're like, wow, this is like a lot for $5. And I'm like,
Right.
You're welcome. But it's the point is like I didn't do it because of that. I just wanted to be able to have the opportunity to let new players or even experienced players have the opportunity to go out and have a good time.
100%, yeah.
And you know, that's really the point of D&D. D&D is a game where you and a bunch of your, as Matt Mercer puts it, nerdy ass friends
Yeah,
get together each and every week or month or year or whatever you make time for
Right.
in between, you know, your doctor's appointments as you're like sitting there like, all right, we got 10 minutes, bro.
Right,
What's your rope doing?
Right.
But yeah, I think the biggest problem I ran into as a player was finding other players in a DM. And so oftentimes you're going to run into inevitably the pitfalls that we talked about of the DM problem.
Yes.
Of this isn't the right group for you. This isn't the right DM for you. So what do you do then? Well, in those situations, you have two options.
Yeah.
One, you either find new people, nicer people. Hopefully at like one of your local spots, you recruit people. So like what I did was, when I was looking for players, I started to recruit people. Shaizon was one of the people I recruited for the show because he had the personality type I was looking for. Arguably as a player, you can do the same thing because literally like I was a player and we were like, Shaizon and I were like, bro, we both want to play together. And I started, one of my buddies was like, yeah, you know what? Passively, he's like, yeah, I could DM. And I was like, you're going to DM for us now. And then I grabbed a third person who was our friend who we really get along with. And I was like, you're going to jump in.
And that was a super fun.
And then we continue to like pull together like these situations where like sometimes, you know, someone has to step up. And if you're an experienced player, it might be your time.
Yeah, to be honest, yeah.
And if you're a new player, hopefully you can find a group that you get along with.
So pretty much D&D increases your networking skills.
Actually,
yes.
Yeah, so like for real, I'll say this. One of the things I've gotten really good at from D&D is I'm a communications major, but you might not know this. My 10 years of DMing experience in improv has actually made me really, really good at bullshitting on the spot.
Yeah.
So because of those skill sets, I'm able to bleed that skill set into my real world skill sets where somebody's like, hey man, we really need you to like tell me how you would articulate this. And I go, well, I would articulate it this way. And they go, wow, man, that sounds really, really good. And I go, choo choo.
Right.
All because of D&D. But on the same token, there's a lot of other environments that do the exact same thing. So like, you know, Renaissance festivals, they have like a lot of...
I didn't even think about that. Yeah,
so
go
like
to your Renaissance festival, and you probably find so many people who want to play D&D.
Yeah, so if you're like a loner type and you're looking for a group of friends to play, go to environments where your nerdy locals hang out.
Yes.
Don't be a creep, but like hang out and be like, yo, I'm trying to make some friends. And sometimes people like me who are nice would be like, yeah, bro, we could be friends. Yeah. And then they just like pull you into the little group and they're like, oh, you classic little introvert, you. There.
Right.
It's okay. You're safe here in your new home.
Welcome home, young one.
And speaking of being home, we're going to go ahead and call that here for tonight. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you guys next week on The Resource Gatherer.
Bye.
Bye.